Hello, everyone. I'm the director of BootCamp GIS. We've got a new paradigm for education where we bring subject matter experts into the forefront to teach all the rest of you what it is that they're really good at in a project like fashion. And we have one of our best experts here, Shetal Dakal, who's come to us with this fantastic expertise about being in the field, developing workflows that collect data for municipalities, and we're glad to have him here. Hi, Shetal. How are you?
Hi, Andres. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Shetal, I'd like to hear, for the benefit of our audience, I love the idea of talking about the path and how you got connected to GIS because it's usually not really a straightforward one. It's always a circuitous route. Tell me about how you got to this position today and found the love of GIS implementations.
Sure. Yeah, right after finishing high school, I was a student, very eager learning science and mathematics, and I always wanted to do something on geography, but I also wanted to pursue my career in the applied part of geography. And at that point, I didn't know what that would be, so I enrolled in this program called geomatics engineering, and it was a fantastic program. We learned about engineering survey, and we learned about remote sensing. And at the very final, I think it was a senior year, they taught us about GIS, and I instantly fell in love with it because it was geography, but it was more than that. It was data science. It was the applied part of geography, and it was very visual, right? We would create maps, and then we would analyze all this data, and I fell in love with that domain instantly, and ever since that, I've pursued that as my career.
Did that take you through getting a geography degree or a master's? What was the educational part of it?
Yes, so the geometrics itself was half GIS. So there was kind of GIS degree, and then I also got a master's in hydrology geosciences. Um, while pursuing that, I did my master's thesis in GIS and remote sensing. And then again, I turned around and said, "Hey, let me also get a GIS certificate." So with those three degrees in hand, I was ready to explore the GIS career.
Excellent. And I suspect that a lot of what you're going to show today was stuff you just ended up learning on the job. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, because they don't teach this in school. So when you're in school, they start with fundamentals of GIS, if you're lucky, and they talk about the software and projections and all those good stuff, which is really helpful. But when you are in the job, nobody, or it's seldom that people ask you about projection or geodesy, or those kind of thing. It's the more practical part that you perform every day in the job. And I was lucky enough to learn all this stuff um, by trial and error method. But once I got the handle of it, it's been really smooth sailing, and I've been able to help my clients save time and get the maximum bang for their bucks.
So, coming to your class in thinking about field data collection and workflows for a municipality, I always say when I'm explaining the GIS for the person next to me on the airplane, and I explain what field I'm in GIS. I said, just look out the window. You see all of that stuff that you see in the city below us. Somebody has to figure out the positions and then describe it through these things called attributes for every bit of it. Tell us a little bit about the things that you focus on in your class for data collection.
Sure. So, like you said, we don't realize, but there are a ton of assets and utilities and point of interest out there that somebody is collecting data, right? If we look for example, like for local government and municipalities, they have utilities assets. They have water, sewer, storm, electricity, telecommunication, right? And all these utilities, they have the assets on the ground and above the ground. So you're looking at manhole, hydrants, and conduits. Somebody is out there collecting this data for installing, reinstalling, maintenance, and all those things that local governments and municipalities do. But it not only, and it doesn't end there. there are other points of interest, right? Like potholes and illegal dumping, graffiti. Local governments, they really have to get information about all these things, and then process them, visualize them, and make a good judgment call on what to do with all these assets and point of interest. So in my class, we go through the GIS workflow on how we can collect all this information using smartphones, and how we can analyze them, process them, and visualize them for you and your colleagues and your management to visualize all these assets in the ground on a computer screen. So we walk through all these workflows, and yeah, that's pretty much summarizes what I talk about in the class.
And I compare it to the analogy when I've heard that, the people that paint the Golden Gate Bridge, golden color, orangish color, once they finish painting it, they have to start over and start painting it again. So that's the same thing about data collection for a city. Is there is so much to collect that it's just an ongoing, nonstop process.
Absolutely. Yes, there are thousands of water meters, for example, and then there's always transaction happening. There's always change of hand in the parcel. Somebody else buys the parcel. There are meters that needs to be closed. Potholes. There's always a new pothole that the city has to address. So yeah, it's an ongoing process. It never ends. The only thing we can do is make the workflow efficient, so it does not take as much time as it used to before. And that's one of the things that we address in our course. The pen and paper workflow is going away. And the new paradigm is using your cell phone, your tablet, internet connection, GIS, maps, and we go about over all these things in the course.
So to get to the title of our class, the crucial time-saving tips that you can share with the audience with your experience. Tell us your first tip.
Sure. There are a few things one can do to be more efficient um, and apply the workflow in an efficient manner and time-saving manner. The first thing I always tell my student is always address the audience. You might be the GIS guy sitting in the office, and you might have looked over all these fields and attributes, and what the field crew out there is going to collect in the ground. And more often, people just create their schemas and their attributes and their layer themselves without even talking to the audience. And I think that's a big mistake, because every time I've done that, somebody else comes in and they ask me to add few more fields, add more attributes, add domains, and whatnot. So I think the number one thing that I always suggest is talk to your audience, talk to the person who is going out in the field and collecting data, see what kind of information they really want to collect, and design your attributes, your database, your layer, thinking about them and having all those things that they have asked for. Incorporate that into your layer, and you'll have more success.
For sure. Collecting it correctly the first time is much less time intensive than collecting it twice or three times. So
Absolutely.
Great tip. Okay, what's your second tip?
The second tip I have is always look for templates and don't reinvent the wheel, right? Because any projects that you are working on right now, chances are somebody else has worked on the project already, and there are a ton of resources out there in the internet. We offer a few ArcGIS Pro projects and schemas as templates in the course itself that you can download and start using right away in the course. Because if you try to reinvent the wheel and create the workflow, it's going to be okay, but you might be spending a lot of time that you could have spent somewhere else more effective. So look for templates, look for schemas, look for projects that are out there already, download them, massage them a little bit, make them use for your own case, and implement them.
Yeah, fantastic advice. And that's great that you can come away from the class using these templates and being that farther ahead in your thinking and your data maturity. So good idea. And how about your third tip?
Okay, so my third tip is interesting. We live in connected world, right? And we have a cell phone all the time, data connection all the time. And we tend to think we will always have internet, even when we go out in the field. And and as a GIS professional, I have created workflows where I wasn't mindful about what's going to happen if the field crew do not have internet connection. Um, and that's a wrong thing to do. I think when you develop your workflow, you should also be thinking about what's going to happen if there's no internet connection out in the field. Maybe you are in a very remote place and there's just no cell phone tower. Or maybe you are in a dense city and you are under a high-rise building and they are obstructing the cell phone signal. Whatever be the case, I think you should be prepared to have your workflow work even when there is no internet. So I would suggest my students to always think about the disconnected workflow and implement that in your workflow so that you have no surprises when the field crew is out in the field.
So think about that. What Chital is saying is, in all of these tips, really has a lot of preparation outside of just, using some device and filling out a form. Probably half of it is anybody that goes through this class being the architect of what the workflow is. I used to collect data myself as a Trimble GPS instructor and teaching others as well. And we spent, I would say, 2/3 of the time in the office preparing, our data dictionaries and thinking about what we were going to collect in the schema, just like what you talked about, and only 1/3 actually collecting the content itself. So that's the power these days of being the architect of all these different enterprise GIS processes, is making sure you have something that's efficient, and time savings is the title of your talk. So
Absolutely.
that's really, really good to hear, and also give the audience an insight on that. It's not just showing how to fill out the form on some geolocation device.
Right. Absolutely.
So Chital, I surveyed some of our students who haven't taken your class yet, by the way, and I asked them, what would you like to ask our field data collection workflow expert? And a few questions came in to me through email that I wanted to share with you. And so first one is Clay from Chicago. Can I do this course without having a precision GPS unit available to me?
Absolutely. So the way these apps, take example of Collector, the way they work is they work with the integrated GPS in your cell phone. That's what you want. But if you are looking for a very accurate reading, you can of course integrate your cell phone, tie that up with a um, more accurate GPS using Bluetooth and collect the data. But that's the only part that's different. Connect to your cell phone with a high accurate GPS. But everything else remains the same. You collect the data using your cell phone, all the data gets pushed into your database, you create dashboard. So everything remains the same. It's just that you connect your cell phone with a high accurate GPS using Bluetooth and you are good to go.
Say, let's compare that. So your cell phone would get about how much accuracy compared to a Bluetooth connection to a Trimble mapping unit that gets, well, I know probably a couple centimeter accuracy if you use one of those.
Right. So I have seen a variety of cell phones, and the accuracy really depends on the kind of cell phone that you're using. A very high-end cell phone will give you probably you'll be a couple of feet in the worst case. But yeah, like you said, a high accurate GPS would bring you in about centimeters kind of accuracy. But for what you do with for local governments and for many of the projects, you really don't need any high accurate GPS. For example, if you were surveying trees out there, right, all the protected trees in the cities, it doesn't really matter if the coordinate is off by a couple of feet. So for the variety of projects that we do, we don't even use high accurate GPS. But there are some projects that really need high accurate GPS, and a very good example would be surveying conduits because they are so small. If you are like even like 2 or 3 feet off, there is another conduit there in the street, so you might want to use a high accurate GPS. But other than that, you are good using a well um, a phone like a Samsung or iPhone or high-end phone, and you'll be just fine.
Excellent. Okay. So Sylvia from Ontario says, I've applied for a few jobs with municipalities in our metro area. Will they all have a use for this type of workflow that you teach? And what do I highlight in my resume?
That's a very good question. The answer is yes. If you live in a city that has water, sewer, storm, has pavements, has street signs, has trees, I bet your municipality is collecting the data in one way or another. And, and GIS has become this central platform where all the departments come to get data from. So be it engineering, be it planning, be it economic development, be it police department, all these departments now are more and more dependent on GIS to collect information and to visualize those information in a map. So if you highlight your skill set on the resume, if you highlight all the projects that you have done, maybe you have done a field collection of manholes or water mains or hydrants, and if you mention them in your resume, anyone who is taking a look at it would instantly know that they can deploy you in one of these projects. And I think that would increase your chance of being hired.
And also there's an array of software that Chital takes each student through the class. So listing those in combination is going to be really key on your resume as well. So the Esri stack is so popular. So Sylvia, if you're listening, list those combination of apps like Survey 123 Collector and Workforce and ArcGIS online, and you'll be really good. You'll be set up really well. Pablo from Austin says, I like the idea of becoming the architect of the workflow. How do you diagram this out to get a common understanding and buy-in from the people who are asking you to do this?
Sure, and I think having a workflow diagram or something more tangible that you can have in your hand when you go out and talk to the real consumer of this technology helps a lot. What I tend to do is I map out the solution in a slide or in a paper and exactly show them, this is where you stand, this is where you collect data, this is where I am, this is the function that I do, and this is how the management or whoever is looking at the maps and visualization and dashboard, this is how they're gonna see the data being collected. I think having that in a tangible form really helps. In our course, we go through this exercise of not only collecting the data, but also creating a back-end view of it, right? So that when you hand over the same diagram to someone else, they would instantly understand how the data is being pushed into the central database and how it is again being displayed in a beautiful dashboard. So we go through that exercise in this course. And I think that would be a really helpful thing to do when you are out in the world doing this project with real professionals.
Yeah, so that's the real advantage of taking a class like this, is that you can elevate yourself to not just the person collecting the data in the field, but the architect. And that is the focus of a lot of our classes. So in conclusion, Chital, thank you for all those answers. Chital's built this wonderful class of 10 lessons that really showcases the real world workflows that you've used in, name some cities that you've used this, Chital, where?
Sure. So I've worked with, I'm mostly based in San Francisco Bay Area. So I've worked with City of Pittsburgh in the past. I was a consultant GIS coordinator for them, and I created enterprise GIS and also deployed all this workflow there. And now I'm working for City of Vallejo, which is also in San Francisco Bay, and creating all these workflows for them and having them and kind of like revolutionizing their pen and paper workflow with the more GIS friendly, more electronic friendly version of the data collection. I've also worked with states, agencies in the past, and some research institution. And everywhere I go, they collect data. And by moving to more GIS friendly, data collection methods has, I've seen great results from everywhere that I've worked in the past.
So this workflow is these 10 lessons, and it's all packaged with the software that you would need to run these, plus some data and the pretty simple video demos and explanations, just like Shatal has done here on this call. So we welcome the audience to come out and check out his class, and it's part of our take the education you want, when you want, and at the price you want, because there's different levels. And if you wanted to kind of package it up into a certificate program, you could, and take any 6 classes on the platform and get a enterprise GIS certificate from our education partners like San Diego State University. So thank you, Shatal, for joining us today. Thanks for our audience for coming in, and we hope to see you in your class. All right.
Thank you, Andres. My
Bye-bye
pleasure.
for now.